What takes place when one of Hollywood's most admired filmmakers sits down for what is meant to be a standard promotional appearance, only to find himself caught in a confrontation that lays bare the harsher side of daytime television? Ron Howard, the acclaimed director behind celebrated films like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Rush, believed he was stepping onto The View to talk about his newest production. Instead, he soon realized he was locked in an unexpectedly tense exchange with Joy Behar, whose pointed remarks and sharp interpretations would test even the calmest guest. What unfolded became one of the most uneasy moments viewers had seen on a talk show in years. Backstage at ABC Studios, the atmosphere carried the usual buzz that precedes a live broadcast. Ron straightened his tie and skimmed the notes his publicist had prepared. The conversation was intended to center on his upcoming movie, a heartfelt drama set in small-town America that was already attracting award speculation. Over the span of his decades-long career, he had participated in countless interviews, from his early days portraying Opie Taylor to directing some of the industry's most successful films. He was no stranger to publicity circuits. This appearance seemed destined to be straightforward. A production assistant signaled that it was time. Ron followed her through winding hallways lined with framed photos capturing notable guests and standout moments from the show's history. The applause of the studio audience drifted toward him as the hosts took their places behind the recognizable semicircular table. Whoopi Goldberg's voice resonated through the studio as she introduced him with enthusiasm, highlighting his 5 decades in entertainment, first as an actor and later as one of Hollywood's most accomplished directors. When Ron stepped onto the stage, the audience greeted him warmly. His familiar smile spread across his face as he waved, exchanged greetings with the hosts, and settled into his seat. The bright studio lights felt intense, though he attributed the sensation to natural nerves about promoting a film that meant a great deal to him. Whoopi began the discussion with genuine warmth, mentioning how she had admired him since his days on The Andy Griffith Show. Ron responded with gratitude, reflecting fondly on those early experiences and expressing appreciation for having grown up in the public eye. His tone carried the steady sincerity that had long been part of his public persona. Sarah Haynes leaned forward, eager to explore the themes of his new film. She noted its focus on unity and perseverance and asked what had drawn him to such a story. Ron's expression brightened as he described his inspiration. He explained that in a time marked by division, he felt people often overlooked their shared values. The narrative reminded him of the sense of connection he remembered from his youth, when neighbors supported one another regardless of differing opinions or backgrounds. It was at this moment that the conversation shifted. Joy Behar interjected, her tone noticeably sharper. She questioned the way he described the America of his childhood, suggesting that it was hardly idyllic for many. She referenced segregation, limited rights for women, and discrimination against marginalized groups, implying that nostalgia for that period overlooked significant injustices. A subtle tension filled the studio. Ron paused, clearly surprised by the abrupt change in direction. He responded carefully, stating that he had no intention of glorifying the past. He acknowledged that every era carried its own struggles and emphasized the progress society had made over time. Joy countered swiftly, arguing that when public figures evoke the good old days, it can imply longing for a time when certain groups held disproportionate power. Her words carried a pointed edge, reframing his reflections as politically charged rather than personal memories. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing that the exchange was no longer a routine promotional conversation. What had begun as a discussion about filmmaking now felt like a broader cultural debate. Offstage, Ron's publicist watched anxiously as the tone continued to harden. Maintaining composure, Ron clarified that his remarks were centered on community spirit, not political systems or social hierarchies. He reiterated that his film focused on human connection, on the idea of people looking out for one another during difficult times. To him, that sentiment transcended partisan lines. Joy leaned back unconvinced. She argued that art and politics are inseparable, especially when influential voices reflect on the past. In her view, nostalgia cannot be detached from the realities faced by those who endured hardship during those same years. The implication was clear. Even seemingly apolitical reflections carry weight when delivered on a national platform. The studio atmosphere grew increasingly strained. What viewers had anticipated as a light, engaging segment had transformed into a pointed ideological clash. Sunny Hostin appeared ready to interject, perhaps recognizing the need to redirect the discussion before it escalated further. Ron's expression, while still measured, hinted at mounting frustration. Accustomed to thoughtful conversations about storytelling and craft, he now found himself defending the interpretation of his personal memories. The exchange underscored how easily a promotional appearance can evolve into something far more confrontational when differing perspectives collide in real time. For many watching at home, the moment was both riveting and uncomfortable. It highlighted the unpredictable nature of live television, where carefully planned talking points can give way to unscripted conflict. In the span of a few minutes, a respected director promoting a heartfelt film became entangled in a broader debate about history, memory, and responsibility. The encounter served as a reminder that public platforms often amplify deeper cultural tensions. Even reflections rooted in personal experience can spark contention when filtered through contrasting worldviews. As the segment continued, it was evident that what was intended as a routine conversation had evolved into something far more charged, leaving an impression that lingered long after the cameras moved on. "Joy, I think Ron is simply trying to discuss his movie," one of the co-hosts attempted gently, sensing the tension building. "No, let him respond." Joy shot back, her gaze fixed intently on her increasingly uneasy guest. "I want to know whether Ron Howard believes the civil rights movement was just a group of people whining about the so-called golden era he seems to cherish." Ron's jaw tightened slightly, the shift so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not watching closely. Years of experience in front of cameras had trained him to remain steady under scrutiny. He had faced tough interviews before, but this felt different. The question was not merely challenging, it was framed in a way that seemed intended to corner him regardless of what he said. "Joy, with respect, you're attributing statements to me that I never made," Ron replied evenly. "I've consistently supported civil rights, women's equality, and fairness for everyone. My work over the years reflects themes of empathy and inclusion." "Does it?" Joy pressed, her tone sharpened with skepticism. "Or are they just feel-good narratives that comfort certain audiences without truly confronting uncomfortable truths?" A visible unease settled over the panel. The other hosts exchanged quick glances, clearly aware that the discussion had strayed far from its original purpose. Even Whoopi, known for direct questioning, appeared taken aback by the intensity of Joy's approach. Ron inhaled deeply, allowing his professional instincts to guide him as he tried to steer the dialogue back to safer ground. "If you look at my films from A Beautiful Mind to 13 Lives, you'll find stories centered on perseverance and collaboration. They focus on individuals overcoming obstacles together. These aren't political slogans. They're reflections on shared humanity." "Shared humanity," Joy echoed, her voice dripping with doubt. "That's often a convenient way of avoiding controversy. It's easy to talk about how inspiring people can be when you're insulated from the struggles others face. That's privilege, Ron. You can make uplifting movies while others are fighting for fundamental rights." The audience had grown completely quiet. The warmth that greeted him earlier had dissipated, replaced by a palpable tension. Ron's hands tightened slightly around the arms of his chair, the first outward sign that his well-known patience was being tested. He straightened, his usually gentle voice gaining firmness. "Joy, I'm not entirely sure what outcome you're hoping for, but it feels as though you're determined to cast me as some sort of antagonist for creating films that aim to unite audiences. That's not privilege speaking. That's decades of experience in storytelling." Joy's eyes gleamed at the pushback. "Experience," she repeated pointedly. "The experience of being a white man in Hollywood. The experience of having opportunities handed to you that others had to fight tooth and nail for." "I began working professionally at 6 years old," Ron responded, maintaining as much composure as possible. "I've spent more than 50 years in this industry and witnessed profound changes. I've made deliberate efforts to hire diverse teams and bring inclusive narratives to the screen, more so than many of my peers." "More than many of your peers," Joy repeated with a mocking inflection. "Listen to yourself. You're comparing yourself to other older white men and calling that progress. That's a low benchmark." Whoopi attempted to interject, her voice carrying a hint of caution. "Joy, perhaps we should refocus on the film itself." "I think this discussion is long overdue," Joy insisted, never breaking eye contact with Ron. "Hollywood frequently congratulates itself for minimal improvements while ignoring deeper structural issues. Directors like Ron symbolize that complacency." Ron's knuckles had turned pale against the fabric of his chair. "What exactly would you like me to do?" he asked, the strain finally audible. "Apologize for having a long career. Express regret for telling stories that resonate with audiences." "I'd like acknowledgement," Joy replied quickly. "Acknowledgement that your rise happened within a system that sidelined countless talented individuals who didn't share your background or connections." "That characterization is deeply unfair," Ron said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "I've dedicated my life to my craft. I've treated colleagues with respect and tried to create projects that matter. Success doesn't automatically negate integrity." Joy let out a short, cutting laugh that echoed across the studio. "Worked hard," she repeated, her disbelief evident. "So did many people who never received the same breaks." The room felt heavy, the energy thick with discomfort. Viewers at home could sense the mounting strain as what began as a promotional visit had morphed into a broader indictment of the entertainment industry and Ron's place within it. Ron held his posture, though the ease he had displayed earlier was gone. His responses grew more deliberate, measured not just for clarity but for survival within the exchange. Each sentence seemed weighed carefully, mindful of how easily it could be reframed. The confrontation underscored the unpredictable nature of live television. A segment intended to spotlight a new film had become a debate over legacy, opportunity, and systemic inequities. While Ron attempted to articulate his perspective without escalating tensions further, Joy continued to challenge the foundation of his success. The other hosts appeared torn between stepping in and allowing the clash to play out. The audience remained silent, absorbing every word. The shift from cordial conversation to pointed interrogation had been swift, leaving little room for the light-hearted discussion that typically accompanies a film promotion. As the exchange continued, it became evident that neither side was willing to yield ground. Ron maintained that storytelling could inspire unity and reflection without being partisan. Joy maintained that neutrality in a divided world is itself a stance shaped by advantage. The collision of those viewpoints unfolded in real time, raw and unfiltered, under the glare of studio lights. You moved from being a child performer to a major director without ever having to demonstrate your worth the way a woman or a person of color would have been forced to. Joy continued, her words sharp and unrelenting. And you call that hard work? The rest of the panel seemed immobilized, watching as one of Hollywood's most widely admired figures was steadily dismantled on live television. Sarah Haynes looked as though she wished she could disappear beneath the table, while Sunny Hostin kept her eyes fixed on her papers, clearly unsettled by how far the exchange had strayed from its original purpose. I proved myself every single day, Ron replied, his voice tight with restrained frustration. Each film I directed had to stand on its own. After I outgrew child roles at 18, nothing was handed to me. Of course, Joy answered, her tone dripping with irony. Because the film industry is famously fair and purely based on merit. Tell me something, Ron. Over the years, how many female directors did you personally recommend for opportunities? How many filmmakers of color did you take under your wing? I've mentored dozens of emerging directors. Ron began, but she cut him off. Dozens, she pressed. Be specific, provide numbers, give names. If you're going to claim you're not part of a larger issue, you should be prepared to support that claim. Ron stared at her, his face reddening. I don't need to put my entire professional life on trial here, he said firmly. This was meant to be a conversation about my latest project, not an inquisition. Everything becomes an inquisition when someone has benefited from a flawed structure. Joy snapped. You can't simply appear here, promote a sentimental film, and ignore the fact that the system that made you wealthy has excluded countless others for generations. I've ignored nothing. Ron responded, strain evident in his voice. But I won't apologize for working hard and achieving success. If there's an issue with the broader industry, address it at that level. Don't single out artists who are trying to tell meaningful stories. The Joy leaned closer, lowering her voice into something colder and more deliberate. You are the industry, Ron. People like you control which narratives are funded and who gets to bring them to life. When you talk about small-town America, whose version are you portraying? I'm portraying experiences that resonate widely, he answered, though his composure was beginning to crack. Widely, Joy repeated with skepticism. That's another convenient term. Widely often means centered on what white audiences find relatable. If it were truly inclusive, it would reflect every perspective, not a polished version designed to keep suburban viewers comfortable. Ron shook his head in visible exasperation. You're distorting everything I say. I've directed films about a gay mathematician, about a black jazz musician, about working-class individuals overcoming impossible odds. How is that sanitized? You told those stories for mainstream audiences. Joy shot back. There's a distinction between representation and exploitation. When you profit from someone else's lived experience, who ultimately benefits? Who controls the narrative? The studio had grown utterly silent, the audience caught between disbelief and fascination as they watched a man long regarded as one of Hollywood's most congenial figures face an intense verbal barrage. Ron Howard, known for steering clear of controversy and maintaining a spotless reputation over 5 decades, was now being cast as an embodiment of systemic imbalance. I benefit because I'm the director, Ron said, patience thinning. But so do the actors, the production team, and the countless crew members involved. That's how filmmaking functions. Filmmaking as business. Joy replied with disdain. It always circles back to profit, doesn't it? Not artistic integrity. Not accountability. Just revenue generated from other people's stories while congratulating yourself for minimal progress. Ron's face was flushed now, his renowned calm barely intact. I don't understand what you expect me to say, he said, frustration edging into his tone. Should I stop directing altogether? Donate everything I've earned? What would satisfy you? I expect candor. Joy answered, her volume rising to meet his. I want acknowledgement that your entire career unfolded within a framework that consistently elevated people who resemble you over others. I want you to stop presenting uplifting films as some grand civic contribution. My films have entertained millions and provided employment for thousands. Ron shot back, his voice trembling slightly. If creating work that inspires and supports livelihoods doesn't count for something, then what does? Joy struck the table with her palm, the sound echoing sharply and startling everyone on set. Entertainment alone isn't sufficient, she declared. Not when people are suffering. Not when democratic institutions are strained. Not when fundamental rights are at risk. Movies that soothe audiences can become distractions from urgent realities. The other hosts could no longer ignore the derailment. Whoopi attempted once more to steady the situation. Joy, perhaps we should pause and regroup. I'm not finished, Joy insisted, her focus unwavering. I want to hear him defend telling audiences that everything will work out when clearly it hasn't. In that instant, Ron abruptly rose from his chair. The sudden movement drew a collective gasp from the crowd. His face burned crimson, his hands trembling faintly with barely suppressed anger. For the first time in a career spanning half a century, the director once affectionately regarded as one of America's most even-tempered figures appeared to have reached the limits of his restraint, standing under the studio lights with emotion finally breaking through the composure he had maintained for decades. You know what, Joy? Ron said, his voice trembling with barely contained anger, though still carrying that unmistakable cadence viewers had recognized since his Mayberry days. I came here to discuss a film that celebrates the best qualities in people. Instead, I've endured 20 minutes of a relentless personal attack from someone who clearly has her own agenda. Joy's eyes sparkled with what she perceived as triumph, believing she had finally rattled the famously composed director. Oh, now I have an agenda. What is my agenda, Ron? She said. Your agenda, he replied, pointing toward her, is tearing people down to make yourself feel powerful. You're not interested in accountability or justice. You want to appear smart, even if it means ruining someone else's reputation in the process. The other hosts were frozen in silence. Whoopi's mouth hung open slightly, while Sarah Haynes looked as though she wished she could vanish entirely. The discussion had moved far beyond political debate, it had become personal combat, broadcast to millions of viewers. Destroying my reputation, Joy scoffed. Your reputation is a facade, Ron. The lie that talent alone got you here, that the system is fair, that if someone works hard enough, success will follow. You are the poster child for white entitlement being rewarded. Ron's jaw tightened visibly. White entitlement. I've won Academy Awards. My films have earned billions worldwide. I've employed thousands of people and told stories that have resonated with millions. If that counts as entitlement, then your expectations are impossibly high. Joy sprang to her feet to meet his intensity. Those awards were handed to you by others who look like you. Those billions of dollars came from audiences conditioned to see people like you as default. You think that makes you exceptional? Ron advanced slightly, his fists clenched at his sides. What makes me exceptional is a lifetime of dedication to this craft. I've treated every collaborator with respect and dignity. I've never been involved in a scandal, never harmed an employee, never misused my position. And yet you reduce all of that because of the color of my skin. There it is, Joy said triumphantly, clapping her hands. The white victim card. Poor Ron Howard, finally facing the consequences of his privilege. This isn't about privilege, Ron exploded, his voice echoing through the studio. This is about you being bitter and angry, deriving satisfaction from tearing down those who succeed. You couldn't make it as a comedian, so now your career is built on destroying others. The audience collectively gasped. Joy's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing in disbelief. Ron Howard, a man who had never publicly attacked anyone, had just landed a sharp, personal blow. How dare you? She whispered, her voice trembling. How dare I? For what? Ron replied, his tone icy now. You dish it out for a living, but apparently you can't handle it when someone responds in kind. You want to talk about failed careers? Let's discuss yours. You were a mediocre stand-up comic who reinvented herself as a professional critic. Whoopi tried to intercede. Ron, perhaps we should pause. No, he said, never averting his gaze from Joy. I'm done stepping back. I'm done being polite while people like you use their platforms to spread venom. The problem in this country isn't successful storytellers, it's people like Joy, who equate tearing others down with building them up. Joy's hands shook, the facade of confidence she had maintained for years starting to crumble. You know nothing about my work or what I've accomplished, Ron continued. You've spent the last half hour trying to destroy someone's reputation simply because you disagree with his success. You've turned a conversation about art into a vicious attack, and millions at home just witnessed the real you. It's not flattering. Sarah Haynes attempted a lifeline. Maybe we can focus on the movie now? There's no point, Ron said, moving toward the edge of the stage. This was never about the film. It was about your need to prove moral superiority. Congratulations, Joy. You've shown you can ambush a guest who arrived in good faith. I hope it was worth it. Joy's voice cracked as she called after him. Run away. That's what privileged people do when confronted with reality. Ron stopped, slowly turning back to face her one last time. The studio fell silent, the only sound the faint whirring of cameras capturing this extraordinary confrontation. The reality, he said quietly, but with dangerous intensity, is that I've spent 50 years earning respect through hard work and integrity. The reality is that you've built a career on cruelty and call it honesty. And the reality is that after today, everyone will see clearly who the real problem is. Get out, Joy shouted, pointing toward the exit. I was already leaving. Ron replied calmly, straightening his jacket with dignity. Good luck explaining this to your producers. As he walked off the set, the audience erupted, a mixture of applause and murmured shock filling the room. Some cheered for the director who had finally confronted what many considered bullying, while others were stunned by the complete collapse of civility they had just witnessed. Joy stood at the table, chest heaving, hair slightly disheveled from her animated gestures. The remaining hosts stared at her, unsure how to proceed, while production staff scrambled to adjust and salvage the next segments. Producers backstage made urgent calls, knowing that this exchange would be replayed endlessly on social media and news outlets. Joy had secured the confrontation she sought, but it had come at a cost that would linger over her career. Meanwhile, Ron Howard removed his microphone, shook hands with apologetic staff, and left the studio. His reputation, rather than diminished, had grown stronger, bolstered by his refusal to be publicly bullied and his measured, if impassioned, defense against a culture of attack journalism that dominates daytime television. The show would continue without him, but the impact of the encounter was unmistakable. Viewers knew precisely who had emerged from this brutal exchange with integrity intact, and who had faltered under the pressure of their own overreach. The episode became a defining moment, a vivid reminder of how quickly civility can collapse and how resilience and composure can transform a confrontation into a statement of character.